Hey everybody, welcome back to the How Did It Happen podcast. I'm your host, Mike Malatesta. I'm an entrepreneur who's founded and led 2 8-figure companies. I'm also an investor, author, speaker, and lifetime learner. On this podcast, I explore stories of success in every episode and with every guest. What it means, why it's important, and of course, how it happens. You can subscribe, connect, and learn more about me at MikeMalatesta.com. Today I'm fulfilling my promise to you with another amazing success story. Rob Saik is joining me on the podcast. Rob is a farming expert. An agronomist by education, Rob's founded many companies, including the Agri-Data Group, one of North America's largest agricultural consulting firms, as well as farming ventures, fertilizer manufacturers, agri-retail businesses, and distribution as well. His newest company, AGvisorPRO, helps the agriculture community connect using a brand new platform that shrinks time and space by stretching brains rather than bodies. Rob is also the author of 2 best-selling books. The first, The Agricultural Manifesto, 10 Key Drivers That Will Shape Agriculture in the Next Decade. And the second, Food 5.0, How We Feed the Future. His TEDX talk, which is called Will Agriculture Be Allowed to Feed 9 Billion People, has been viewed more than 150,000 times. Rob's passionate about creating entrepreneurial opportunities that combine agriculture and technology to feed the world in the most sustainable and least environmentally impactful ways possible. Hey, Rob, welcome to the podcast.
I'm glad to be here with you, Mike. Exciting to be on your show, and excited to be talking to your listeners about all the things that you want to lead me into.
Yeah, well, I'm excited too because I first became aware of you at Abundance 360 this year when you had a little bit of time to address everybody. And for those who don't know, Abundance 360 is a group that Peter Diamandis put together, and it's just a really cool group of entrepreneurs and other, I guess, really deep thinkers that goes into space and robotics and AI and the future and health and longevity and just all of these things. So once a year, there's this big conference, and we just like 3 days or whatever of just complete immersion into all this stuff flowing at you. And one of the things flowing at me and all of us was Rob. And what got me really interested not only was what he was talking about in terms of the future and stuff, which we'll get into, but Rob is an agricultural specialist who somehow ended up spending 6 hours with Bill Gates. So I ask everybody the same question to get started, Rob, which is how did it happen, but I hardly ever tee it up like that. So let's go.
Well, my background, I started out just on a small mixed farm in northeastern Alberta, Canada. And, if you sat me down at the age of 16 and said, this is going to be your life, you're going to travel around the world, you're going to you're going to develop a whole bunch of companies. You're going to develop a lot of technologies. You're going to have an impact across the country, if not across North America and internationally. And you're going to end up, hanging out with guys like Peter Diamandis, and you're going to end up spending some time with one of the richest guys on the planet. I would have said, bullshit. There's no way that's going to happen.
Yeah.
But it did happen. And, how it happened was an interesting journey. Because, me being involved deeply in agriculture, working directly with farmers, my background is plant physiology, soil chemistry, and crop nutrition. But I've always been involved in ag tech. And, I have a lot of background and knowledge of the whole area of genetic engineering. And I've been a supporter of GMO and gene editing. And so I've written lots of articles on it. And in 2014, I did a TEDx talk, Will Agriculture Be Allowed to Feed 9 Billion People? And it's a real poignant question because, tools are being taken away all the time without knowledge of what the ramifications are. So I did this TEDx talk, and it's been seen over 160,000 times now. Will agriculture be allowed to feed 9 billion people? About that time, I wrote my first book, The Agriculture Manifesto, 10 Key Drivers That Will Shape Agriculture in the Next Decade. And then in 2019, I wrote the second book, Food 5.0. We'll talk about that, how we feed the future. Sure. But the TEDx talk was really, kind of a hit. And I was walking through the San Francisco airport, and I got a call from Cornell University. And Cornell University has a group called the Alliance for Bioscience. And they called me and they asked me to open up the Alliance for Bioscience series with 2 lectures at Cornell University. And so I'm walking along the airport and I said, well, that's great. I'm honored to do so. But how did you hear about me? And they said, oh, you got this TEDx talk and Bill said to watch it. And I'm going, well, Bill who? And they said, well, Bill Gates. And I'm going, shut up. Bill Gates said to watch the TEDx talk. So anyway, it was a couple years later that Bill was gathering some, I think, innovative leadership in the area of agriculture and invited just a handful of us to intellectual ventures, his intellectual venture, his venture and kind of his laboratory playground for new technology just outside of Seattle. And we had 6 hours the whole afternoon with Bill talking about agriculture technology. I had built at that time one of North America's largest agricultural independent agronomic, precision ag, carbon credit, grain marketing, and business management companies layered on top of a data management system, so Agri-Trend and Agri-Data. And I was just in the process of exiting to Trimble at that time out of Sunnyvale, California. And I was explaining to Bill what we were doing with Agri-Data and Agri-Trend. And I also used as an example a farm in Saskatchewan, Canada, and another farm in Uganda, just west of Gulu towards Congo, because I have an investment in a 5,300 acre farm called Omer Farms in Uganda. And I was sharing Bill what we were doing, and he said to me, that's all really good what you're doing, addressing the pinch point in agriculture, which is the right advice from the right expert at the right time. But he said your model doesn't scale, and so that kind of upset me. And then Peter Diamandis challenges us, Mike, to do a moonshot. And so I got to thinking, well, if I could do this over again, and since I just sold the company, I began to think about mashing together eHarmony together with FaceTime, together with Uber, together with Twitter, and created a brand new company called AGvisorPRO. So that's how it happened. I get calls almost every week on sustainability in agriculture, on carbon credits. On October the 15th of this last year, I got a chance to address the United Nations and the FAO on sustainability in agriculture. So so it kind of morphed in. And in February, I was lucky enough to be honored and recognized as one of Canada's top 50 most innovative agricultural leaders. So it's been quite a journey from being on the farm to meeting with Bill Gates.
Yeah, congratulations on that recognition, by the way. And so being in that room with Bill Gates, and there were 6, 7 other people with you, you said? So it was kind of a round table.
There was about 6 presenters, and then there were some observers. The room was the total number of people in the room were no greater than about 30 people altogether, some listening. We had, Bill sat at the table with a couple of other really innovative guys, and basically we all had a chance to stand up in front, talk about what we were working on, what was on our minds, and then we got in a free-flowing discussion. So that was really cool.
And when he, before he challenged you, I guess I wanted to go there, but I'll back up for a second. When you went there, what did you think you were going to? What was your goal? What were you trying to accomplish when you went into the room?
Well, first of all, I got a call from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation saying, "What are you doing on May 2nd of 17?" And I looked at my calendar. Nothing. I can move. I can move whatever's there. So that was kind of cool. Yeah, pretty flexible when that call comes in. And what did I want to do? Well, first of all, you're honored. Secondly, he's a really humble guy. He walked in. He knew way more about me than I knew about him. He was very well versed on all of the guest speakers, and extremely well versed on agriculture and agricultural issues, which I was very impressed about, because the discussions and the conversation we had about agriculture, they weren't fluffy in ideology, and they weren't philosophical. They were very pragmatic, which I really appreciated. And so from what I expected, I don't know. I wanted to go in and meet some cool people, and some of the other people there were from Australia and Africa and Germany, and we were all obviously selected because we were forward thinking, and it was a really great experience. I don't know that I came away with any expectations. And then subsequent to that, the next day I got invited by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to talk about technology transfer for small landholders around the world and how we were going to do that. And I'm still in conversation with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and some of their people around some of those pinch point issues that we're facing as we stare into a population of 9+ billion people by 2050. How are we going to do all of that? So that's where my mind is at.
And when he sort of pushed back on the scalability of your idea, you sort of mentioned kind of like,
yeah,
maybe you weren't expecting that, but it sounds like you channeled it into something positive by saying or considering his point of view on it at least.
Yeah, I think I did. I had built, in 97, when I had built AgriTrend, if you think back to 97, the internet was just starting, email was just starting. And we released in 2000, arguably one of the first fully online data platforms for farm management services and agricultural data management in the world, called Agri-Data. We released the Agri-Data solution and we were recognized as Alberta e-Business of the Year because we'd figured out how to manage farm production data using thin architectural programming on ADSL copper lines. If you think back to that time, there wasn't. We didn't even build software. It was called netware because we were in the cloud before there was the word in the cloud, and so we were that far ahead of the game. But the advisory services that I had built, Mike, were layers of people. So we had coaches, agri-coaches, working on the ground with farmers, and the agri-coaches were cross-referenced by quality control agri-coaches that verified the recommendations, and then everybody was supported by senior agri-coaches, which was interdisciplinary specialists. So we had built layers and layers of people to support the question from a farmer through an agri-coach, through to a senior coach, quality control through quality control coach. And it was heavily humanistic. And of course, that was 1997 thinking. So when I got around to 2015 and by 2018, I was thinking about AGvisorPRO. And I was thinking about, is there a way to shrink time and space? Is there a way to put an expert in the field, in the shop, in the greenhouse, or in the barn without the expert being on the farm? It's like Star Trek, transport. Yeah. Is there a way for us to do this? And it was really his comment that kind of ticked me off a little bit. And I go, okay. And then Peter Diamandis, of course, with Abundance. And I was at the very first Abundance event held at Singularity University with Peter Diamandis and Ray Kurzweil, and Dan Sullivan from Strategic Coach had organized that. There was 52 of us, 2 days, And it was Peter 1 hour, Ray 1 hour, Peter 1 hour, Ray 1 hour.
Okay.
And I remember in 2 days I took 83 pages of notes.
Yeah.
That was the brain literally exploding with what I was hearing, and didn't sleep between the first and second days because my brain was working so fast with the possibilities of what we could do. So those are cool things, when they happen to you. And I don't know how you plan or don't plan them, but when doors open, you just walk through them.
Yeah. Yeah. I get what you're saying about plan or not plan. You just have to be aware.
Yeah.
Oh, there's an open door. Let me see what's there. And then start asking questions or get around the right people and listen or whatever.
Well, the reason that you are interested in Abundance 360, the reason that I'm interested in attending Abundance 360 is because it creates an opening of your brain to all of the other things that are going on in the world. So, you got crypto people, you got blockchain people, you got transportation and energy people, you got medicine, you got all of these disciplines that are there. And, agriculture is highly underrepresented in the Abundance 360 ecosystem.
Right.
So it creates a tremendous opportunity for me to look at what's going on. Like I was CEO of a robotics company for 19 months as we packaged that company up and sold it to Raven Industry. It was called DOT, one of the largest autonomous robotic platforms in the world for broadacre agriculture. And it's exposure to the people like Boston Dynamics and so on and so forth at Abundance that really creates this awareness for you. And once you're aware, your curiosity starts to peak, and then you say, well, how could this technology, such as blockchain, such as crypto, such as robotics, such as remote sensing or satellites, how does this all play back into agriculture and food production? So that's where I come from.
Yeah, and that's so cool because if you separate them, and you're thinking just very narrowly about agriculture or trucking or whatever industry you might be in, you might be thinking, oh, blockchain, that's for financial transactions, and that's all of these things don't relate. But if you open your mind up to, understanding what all of them do and how they can connect, you can bring them back to any industry, right? Pretty much.
It's you think about where we're going. And in fact, let me just do this. I'll say that, the book, Food 5.0, How We Feed the Future. I published this book, Mike. I wrote it in 2019, right, and I published it in August of 2019. So just remember the date, okay? Yeah. August 2019. The first line of the book is, this morning when you woke up, did you think about a pandemic? Oh, that was the first line. That was the first line of this book. First line. So my mind was attuned to the fact that, pre 2020, the world was a pretty good place. I mean, everybody bitches and complains about stuff, but the reality is, the world is a pretty good place. We travel wherever we want to travel. We have freedom. We have the ability to accelerate our earning power. Lots of things are in our favor. But I was thinking about disruptions to the food supply. So I was thinking about war. I was thinking about famine, and I was thinking about pandemics, and I was thinking about nationalism. And in the book, really, I talk about the 5 iterations of agriculture, which are really the era of muscle and machine and chemistry and biotechnology, and where we're at today, which is convergence. So we're in the era of convergence, and Peter Diamandis talks a lot about convergence of technologies. Well, what I'm working on is, how do these technologies converge in farming? How do they work in agriculture? And so that's, when we're exposed, Mike, as we are, it's a real privilege for us to be exposed to the thinking of the people in the room in Abundance 360, because we can grab that into other disciplines and take that energy and ideas over to another place.
Right. And when you say convergence in that context, it reminds me of walking through that open door. Like, I walk through that open door in this, so your TEDx talk is, you're pretty pretty solid on what you believe. And I'm wondering, outside of Gates at this meeting, you've got these 6 or 7 other experts from around the world. And I'm wondering, okay, so he challenged you on the scalability. Were there other people in there challenging you and your thoughts, or vice versa? I'm just trying to, because it's like a room of global experts on agriculture, right? So they can't all believe the same thing. I'm thinking, but I don't know.
Well, again, the room was filled of forward thinkers, and it was all about the implication of technology on agriculture. And so, I don't remember all the names of everybody that were in the room, but I do remember, for example, the Australian guy was talking about the utilization of LiDAR, which is a technology we're using in driverless cars and robotics. LiDAR, which is basically lasers, and then basically you get feedback. So it's the ability to detect things inside of environment. And they were using LiDAR technology to ascertain the muscle composition of cattle. So you'd be able to use remote sensing and basically find out what the composition of the livestock is. And this is very important when you're raising livestock, because certain animals come into the right position at the right time for harvest. Other animals don't, and so that was really interesting. Another company I remember out of Germany was using artificial intelligence to do identification of weeds or problems in crop. And today there's a proliferation of companies that is using photometrics or a variety of other sensors to really detect what's going on in crop. And this could be either this data, these images could be acquired through drones, through aerial imagery or satellite imagery. But if we knew, like I live in Canada, so Canada thistle is a real problem for us. It's a real bad weed. But it doesn't grow everywhere. It grows in certain clumps. And so if you could have a sprayer going across the field and see Canada thistle, and at 12 miles an hour spray out the thistle, just spray the thistle and not the entire field, think about the savings of cost.
Yeah, sure.
That would be to farmers. And so that was another technology that was discussed. Another one was actually a Microsoft guy named Ranveer, and he was talking about TV white space. When I grew up on the farm, we had 3 channels on our rotary dial, 3 TV channels. The rest of it was white space. Those white space channels, Mike, can be utilized now to act as communication channels for broadband internet. And the interesting thing about that is white space transmission of internet signals using the TV white space. It follows the contour of the land, and trees and things like that aren't as it doesn't block it as much as line of sight communication that we have today. So when Ranveer was presenting this, I'm saying, well, this could be an answer, because one of the real constraints in agriculture today, Mike, is lack of broadband service on farm. Like, can you imagine anybody in your city running a $5 or $10 million business without access to the internet? Can you imagine that? No. Of course you can't. Yet there are lots of farming operations that are running $2, $5, $10, $20 million business with inadequate or zero access to internet, poor internet access. It's a travesty, and it's holding back adoption of technology on farms. There's this terminology right now we have on farms where you have IoT, or Internet of Things devices, connected all over the farm. It's called a smart farm. So basically, the farm itself becomes a sensory acquisition, sensory device. But you can't have a smart farm with a stupid internet connection. So,
yeah, exactly. Sure.
Yeah. So those are the kind of
they call that a boat anchor.
Yeah, so those are the kind of technologies that were discussed in the meeting. They were complementary. One of the guys from Africa was actually talking about IoT sensor devices that we're using today in agriculture, such as moisture probes. So how much moisture is left in the soil? Well, we could do that with sensor devices, weather stations, of course, carbon dioxide monitors in grain storage, remote sensing of satellites and aerial imagery I mentioned, all kinds of things, fuel sensors to monitor fuel levels in fuel tanks, and all of these kind of things that are going on in homes. Just think about it being applied on a farm, and how much more information would be coming back as a result of these devices, these sensors being planted all over the farm.
I know Peter's always talking about sensors, like how many sensors, the proliferation of sensors. And so I'm wondering so technology like Starlink or something has got to be at least presenting the possibility that broadband problem could be solved for a lot of places.
That was a very astute comment. I live north of Calgary. I live in a farming community called Olds, Alberta. I'm a half a mile away from town. On the other side of the road, they have 1 gig up and down. Where I live, I have access to a hub, and very often I'm limited to about between 6 and 10 down, and 1 and 3 up. It's many times it's the issue for me communicating. So Starlink and OneWeb and these kind of companies will and you know what I mean, for 600 US you can have the hardware, and it's about $100 a month for the subscription. Don't quote me on that, but I think those are the numbers. And I'm very seriously thinking of doing that because it's 150 down, megabytes per second down, and 50 megabytes per second up. Like shit, that's 10 times what I'm getting right now.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. So when you started Agri-Data, Rob, how would you describe, like now, if you were talking to somebody like me about how you would describe what Agri-Data did, what would you say? Because in my mind, I'm thinking it's like taking tribal knowledge and making it shareable, but I don't know if I'm on the right track there.
No, I think you're very accurate with that. So the first thing I did way back, because my background as an agrologist is agronomy, soil science. So the first thing I did way back in 1996, 97, and this was strategic coach thinking with Dan Sullivan, was to systematize or develop a process. So I developed something called the 10-step soil interpretation process. So you can take a soil test, and I can teach you 10 steps to interpret a soil test. So think about a doctor. You go to a doctor and the doctor gets your blood test. Well, there's a certain thinking that goes on inside the brain of a doctor as he looks at your soil test. There's a certain methodology, a certain hierarchy. So we developed a process called the 10-step soil interpretation process. Then I looked at the whole agronomic cycle of planting and planting a crop. And there's a certain, it's not an event, it's a process that starts with getting the information of the yield and the quality of last year's harvest, locking that data in, and then getting the soil test information in, and then building recommendations, which interestingly enough, I was doing right before this podcast. I was doing a recommendation for a farmer for 120 bushels of triticale per acre. Anyway, and then you build this whole thing. So we built something called the strategic crop plan, which was a process. And then to replicate the strategic crop plan, we developed the Agri-Coach program, which was a replication of the process with people. But to manage all that, we had to do something to manage the data. I started out using Word documents and fax forms. So back in the day, we faxed things. Then Excel spreadsheets, and then eventually I built an Access database. But the problem with an Access database is you never knew who really had the hot data, because if your data was later than mine, but you merged it, that later data actually trumped my current data, and it was a mess. So I learned about, in 1997, maybe 1998, I learned about SQL, And we had a brilliant programmer named Kevin Pattison, who basically listened. He was a farm guy and a computer expert. And together with our leadership, Elston Solberg in soil science and Darren Howie in processing, we built this thing called the Agri-Data solution. And what it allowed us to do was effectively replicate what we were doing and bring multiple sets of eyes to the same piece of data in real time. And the data was always hot data. So today, Mike, I was just working with a farm that I've been working with. I have 22 years of data, 22 years of soil test data and fertility recommendations and crop data. And that's all because we had a system in which to put everything. That data platform today, because we sold the company, is now the guts of Trimble Ag Software, which is now available internationally, I think, in many, many languages around the world. So that all came from the thinking of a bunch of prairie boys in Canada.
Yeah, it's not where you come from. It's not where you come from. So let's get into, when you did your TEDx talk, it was 9 billion. I think the number's probably higher now, maybe 10 billion people that need to be fed. How do we continue to feed the growing population, and even for that matter, feed the people who are here? And I know that there's, or at least I've heard, Robin, you can tell me if I'm full of crap here, but I've heard there's plenty of food. It's getting the food to the people can sometimes be the problem. And I don't know if that's true or not, but let's get into how we actually accomplish this, because in the age of, organic and paleo and vegan and all of these things, celiac, gluten intolerance and all of these things, gluten, wheat, at least as I understand it, the genetic modification of wheat basically saved Europe from mass starvation. But now it's, all of those things complicate. Well, I don't know. Maybe they don't complicate it. Maybe they just, I don't know. You tell me. You're the expert.
Let's just unbundle a little bit of what you
let's do it.
First of all, there's never been any genetically modified wheat on the marketplace. There was some experimental stuff, but the genetically modified wheat it hasn't been commercialized. What you're referring to really is hybridization of wheat, which was done by Norman Borlaug, and yes. That was the Green Revolution, and that really saved over 1 billion people, particularly in the Asian subcontinent, particularly in India. So those scientific advances have been with us for a long time. The other piece that you need to unbundle is what you said about, is there enough food? Well, there might be enough food. And what you referred to is geopolitical issues that prevent food from moving around the planet, where food is used as politics and is used as power to keep food away from people. However, the answer to feeding the people is not in necessarily somebody growing it and then doing food aid. That isn't the answer. And when we talk about food waste, people are always freaked out and they say, oh, well, stop wasting food. Well, they're all concerned about how much we scrape off our plates into the garbage. It's not the big issue. The biggest issue, Mike, the biggest issue for food waste on the planet, the thing that destroys the most food on the planet, is mycotoxins. Mycotoxins are organic toxins that are released from fungus, and mycotoxins destroy crops in the field, and they destroy crops in storage. Mycotoxins are the number one cause of food waste on the planet Earth, and the number one cause of cancer, especially liver cancer, on the planet Earth.
But that's, let me just interrupt you for 1 second. But nobody sees it. They don't see that being scraped off their plate. Is that right? Okay.
No.
Right.
So again, you get back to pragmatism. Your listeners, most of the listeners, wouldn't even know the word mycotoxin. But mycotoxins embody a whole family of toxins, like aflatoxin, for example, and many crops, especially more so organic crops, are prone to higher levels of mycotoxins. So if you want to help people and reduce food waste, the number one thing would be we should concentrate on the reduction of mycotoxin attacking crops globally. In Uganda's rate of liver cancer is amongst the highest in the world. Why? It's because they have a lot of mycotoxins in the crops that they consume. And so that goes into cattle, it goes into your livestock, and it goes into human beings. Anytime it doesn't move from cattle to human beings, but when you're eating the same grain, it gets inside of you. So this is an issue that I think requires some thought. The other thing that we need to be cognizant of is with a planet of 9.5 billion people, Mike, we're going to need to grow 60 to 70% more food in all parts of the planet. We have to grow 10,000 years worth of food in the next 30 years. So think about that. We have to grow the equivalent of 10,000 years worth of food in the next 30 years. How are we going to do that? Or is ideology going to trump the day? Do you really think that any of these religions, whether it's paleo, whether it's veganism, whether it's any of these denominations, do you think anybody has the truth, the light, and the way? Do you think there's one answer to solving the food problem on the planet? There is not. Agriculture is nuanced. Mediterranean growing a dairy industry in New Zealand under Mediterranean conditions is vastly different than running a dairy operation in Canada where minus 40 degrees is not uncommon in the wintertime. So, and so we have people running around with words in their head like agroecology and regenerative agriculture and all of these things, and all of them have merit. Organic has some merit. I don't think there's a farmer out there that I've ever met that wants to spend more money on pesticides or spend more money on fertilizer. Nobody. And yet the organic movement has vilified genetic engineering. That don't make no sense to me. I think the future of agriculture is GMO, genetically modified organic food production. The only way we can have the reduction of synthetics in agriculture is by utilizing the technologies that are available in plant breeding. Everybody is waiting for the COVID vaccine. Oh, give me my COVID vaccine so the life can return back to normal, when that same RNAi technology, when used in agriculture, is vilified as being evil. Explain that to me.
Oh, is that right? So that's what it is. So that's I'm glad you said that, because that's something that needs to be explained. Yeah.
It's the same science. Gene editing, gene silencing. Now we're advancing away, and I don't know that we necessarily need to, but we're advancing away from transgenics, actually to the time where we can do a lot of manipulation, as nature would do, of the crops inside the crop itself. So Arctic apple is a good example. So I'm sitting here with a bag of Arctic apples. So Arctic apples, and the advantage of Arctic apples is that when you slice them open, they don't turn brown right away. So the oxygen doesn't, I think it's called I'll get it wrong here, but there's an enzyme that turns the apples brown. Well, how did Arctic apples deal with it? Well, they flicked off 3 or 4 genes inside the apple. They didn't introduce any new genetics. They just flicked off some genes to slow the browning. Potentially, that would reduce food waste. That would reduce food waste of apples. So when you cut the apple open and send Johnny to school, and Johnny opens his lunch kit, if they still have lunch kits, and the apple is brown and he throws it in the garbage, wouldn't it be better for him to eat it? Well, Arctic apples is a gene editing technology that allows you to do that. That would allow us to save potentially hundreds of thousands of tons of apples from being thrown in the garbage as waste. Well, to do that, we need to embrace technology such as gene editing. So fix the waste problem, but don't use any science to do it. How am I supposed to do that?
What else in the world has been fixed like that, right? Without, yeah, right. So
you can't feed a population of tomorrow with the technology of yesterday. It doesn't work. Agriculture is the same way. So these these things to me are really, and when you get into it, really get into it, I care less about ideology and word phraseology. I care a lot about outcomes. So if in the book I talk about the fact that as long as we have human beings, Mike, on the planet Earth, so I'll just back up a second. So you're sitting down with your paleo, your vegan, and your pescatarian, and your organic and your non-organic friends at a table, and everybody's arguing over the right food, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So put up your hands like that and say, can we just stop for a second? Can we all agree that so long as human beings are on the planet, agriculture must be infinitely sustainable? Who would argue against that?
Right.
Who would argue against the fact that agriculture needs to be infinitely sustainable? Okay, so that shut everybody up for a second. Now, let's discuss what makes agriculture infinitely sustainable. Now people have to do something they haven't done in a long time. They have to think. What would make agriculture infinitely sustainable? Eventually, someone will come up with soil. Good one. The epidermis around the earth that supports human life, the soil, must be sustainable, must be healthy. Agreed. What about water? Water. Water use efficiency. Yeah, that would be a real good one. What about greenhouse gas balance? Okay, let's throw that one onto the table as well, greenhouse gas balance, because we want to, agriculture, by the way, is vilified in the greenhouse gas debate, but agriculture is one of the real big solutions, actually, for climate change. And we can talk more about that. And then the fourth one people always forget about. For agriculture to be infinitely sustainable, farmers have to be viable. Because without viability, you have no sustainability. So farmers have to be viable. Well, what would make farmers viable? Well, they need to get paid adequately.
Yeah, they have to make money.
Yeah. So if you have a green agenda, that says farmers need to move in this direction, you have to be aware of a couple competing things. Number one is that a lot of the agendas will result in something called a yield drag, where yields will actually go down. And organic is a classic example of where the yield drag may be 10, 20, 30%. So there's a yield drag there. If everybody moved to organic food production, I'm not saying you can't buy organic. You can if you want to. I think that's fine. And there's a lot that we can learn from intercropping and cover cropping and rolling of crops, etc. But if everybody moved in that direction, we're going to have to plant a whole bunch more land. Like, where do you find another California?
Right.
Do you cut down the rainforest in Brazil? Is that what we want? So we have to increase food production, and yet we want to strip away the tools that are necessary to do this, or we want to move into a denomination or a theology of farming that would result in production declines. So how does that square away? Right now, the European Union, the Common Agriculture Policy in the European Union, is calling for 25% of the agriculture in Europe to be organic in the next number of years. Fine, great, good. The yield drag will be 8 to 12%. So the whole European Union is going to experience a decrease in production of 8 to 12%. Where is that going to be made up? Where's that going to be made up in face of increasing population? Now, there is lots and lots of good news because we have all sorts of advancements happening. We've got technology advancements. There's all sorts of agronomic and technology advancements that can be made on farms all over the world. There are indoor farming operations cropping up everywhere. Not many of them financially viable, by the way, but the technology exists. There's alternatives to protein development, such as proteins being manufactured from plant-based products, which Canada is famous for pulse crops, peas, lentils, chickpeas, etc. We're one of the largest producers in the world. Or generating meat in laboratories. Now, you say you don't like GMOs because it's generated in a lab, but meat generated in a lab is all good. So I square that one with me.
Right.
We could get into mutagenesis, which is the generation of mutations in crop by exposure of seeds to nuclear or radiation or carcinogenic chemicals in a process called mutagenesis, which is endorsed by the organic industry. So the random scrambling of genes in mutagenesis is totally okay. You can call that an organic crop. That's where your ruby red or your Rio red grapefruit came from through mutagenesis. That can be called organic, but flick off some genes or introduce a gene from another species, and all of a sudden it's Satan. Explain that to me. I don't understand. And yet everybody's applauding the fact that we can grow meat inside of vats, inside of laboratories, and that's good, but you can't use a laboratory to generate plant breeding. That's bad. And yet the generation of RNAi technology for your Pfizer and Moderna and all your injections is good. I need that, but using that in agriculture and food production is bad. It doesn't square with me. Right. Those things don't line up, right? And then we can throw climate change on top of it and get into a whole bunch more stuff yet, if we want to talk.
Yeah, we need another podcast to do all of that stuff. And maybe we'll do that because I'm really interested in getting into some more of the weeds on this. But I've got a couple things that I want to ask you about because I think they're important. One, I think you said something like genetically modified organic.
Yeah.
So what is that? Because I haven't heard that.
Well, it doesn't exist because, of course, the organic movement has vilified genetic engineering. But when you really think about it, when you buy organic, it doesn't say no pesticides. Everybody buys organic because they think there's no pesticides used. If you read the label, it says raised without synthetic pesticides.
Okay.
Because if simply growing organically would allow, if you put up a sign at the end of the field, Mike, and said this field is organic, therefore weeds and insects and diseases, please stay away because it's organic.
Yeah, mycotoxins beware. This is an organic field.
Mycotoxins beware, stay away. This field is signed as organic. It's preposterous. Like, okay, how do we control insects, weeds, and diseases? Well, weeds are controlled through tillage and largely and through covering and rolling. There's a variety of good ways, but tillage is a destructive way to control weeds in soils. What about insects and diseases? Well, how are insects controlled in organic crops? Well, intercropping with crops that resist those insects is a viable solution, but the utilization of organic insecticide is prevalent. So pyrethrum and pyrethroid are a good example. Pyrethrum is an organic insecticide derived from chrysanthemums. So you pick chrysanthemums, crush them, and you will elicit pyrethrum, which is an organic insecticide. It has 6 esters. Pyrethroid is its synthetic cousin. Pyrethroid has 2 esters. Paradoxically, the organic form of pyrethrum is more toxic to human beings and bees and butterflies. So by using the synthetic derivative, you'd actually be safer than the organic derivative. So when you buy organic food, it's not like it doesn't have pesticides on it. It doesn't have synthetic pesticides. But who's to say that the organic pesticides are safer for you than the synthetic cousins?
Right. Okay.
You know, have a look at it. There's chronic there's acute toxicity. There's LD50, lethal dose, kill 50% of the population. It's called LD50 for toxicology measurements. These things exist. And again, it's easy to slap a non-GMO sticker on something. Non-GMO spinach doesn't exist. There is no genetically modified spinach. You're being lied to. Non-GMO pasta by Catelli. You're being lied to. There is no.
Okay, so they're putting it on there even though it doesn't make any scientific sense.
Exactly. Non-GMO Hunt's tomato sauce. There's no such thing as GMO tomatoes in the marketplace. These things don't exist. They're designed to create fear, to pull money out of consumers and vilify a technology that consumers don't understand.
And do you think with that, the reticence to, reticence or the willingness to split hairs on this, do you think that's what is that to do? Is that to raise organic in the minds of the consumer to a higher level, even though organic could possibly be available to way more people if you would just like not be as dogmatic about a certain thing? Or what's your thinking on that?
Well, a lot of this goes back to marketing, right? So if
Yeah.
you can buy eggs for 11 cents an egg, or you can pay 51 cents per egg, depending on the package and the ideology attached to the package of eggs. Now, what I want to do in with AGvisorPRO, what I want to do is I want to have pragmatic conversations about outcomes. I believe that we can feed 9.5 billion people. Sustainability to me, Mike, is having $100,000 in the bank and living off the interest. Is there a way for us to have agriculture so that we don't attack the principle? And attacking the principle really is our soil. So if we start to erode our soil, then we're really attacking the principle, and that is not sustainable. So when you consider the discussions that we're having around sustainability, cover crops, agroecology, regenerative agriculture, organic, GMO, non-GMO, conventional, when you think about all of those things, let's stop talking about ideology and phraseology. Let's talk about outcomes. Let's talk about soil organic matter. Let's talk about carbon sequestration in soils. Let's talk about water use efficiency. Let's talk about reduction of methane and nitrous oxide through agricultural practices. Again, what I'm trying to do right now is I want to create a channel where people can have conversation and learn from each other and learn from experts as to how do we make agriculture more sustainable. Yeah, you're right. I'm really dogmatic and in favor of the utilization of genetic engineering for future agricultural production. Why? Because it makes sense. Mm-hmm. The breeding processes of the past are so slow, and they are so ad hoc and so randomized that you're way better off with the technology of today than you are. Like, how long would the COVID vaccine have taken to build 20 years ago?
Right.
5, 10 years?
And interesting, it's and not only that, but it's also, at least the Pfizer and Moderna with the mRNA, they've sort of changed the whole nature of what a vaccine is. It's a protein now. It's not injecting you with a virus, right? So it's
very specific. Very specific. So what people are listening to me and they're, rolling their eyes or they're mad at me for what I just said or whatever. Don't be. Let's learn more about agriculture. Let's understand that 2/3 of agriculture farmland on the planet is pasture. And you just want to wipe out cattle. Okay, we'll wipe out cattle. 2/3 of agricultural farmland now is not suitable for cropping. It'll never grow a crop. The best thing it can do is turn that cellulose and hemicellulose into meat, into protein for human beings, into milk. Cattle are killing are they really killing the planet? Do you understand the difference between old carbon and new carbon, or old greenhouse gases and new greenhouse gases? Do you really understand that cows eat carbon from crops that pulled carbon dioxide from the air, and they burp out methane that turns back into carbon dioxide? So tell me how livestock is increasing greenhouse gases when the peak of the livestock herd in North America was in 1971.
Yeah. I get it. So people are basically combining CO2 from cows as being the same as CO2 from a smokestack, and they are different. Is that what you're saying?
Well, to be fair, I mean, methane has got 28% or 28 times more greenhouse gassing effects than carbon dioxide does, but it also has a half-life of 10 years that nobody talks about. Nitrous oxide is 311 times more greenhouse gassing than carbon dioxide. Nitrous oxide is released when you till soils. So nobody talks about tillage of soil and the release of nitrous oxide. Nitrous oxide is released when you use fertilizer. So how can we use fertilizer to grow a crop? Hey, here's an idea. Why don't we grab crops that naturally fix nitrogen and use that genetics inside of crops that don't, so we could reduce the amount of nitrogen fertilizer farmers have to use to grow crops. This is actually being done in corn right now, where they isolated nitrogen fixing properties of an heirloom corn in Mexico, and they're grabbing that technology and they're trying to put it into conventional crops. So we could increase corn production, we could decrease the amount of nitrogen, we could decrease the amount of greenhouse gas emissions, but it would take genetic engineering to do it. Do we allow that to happen? Yes or no? Right?
Yeah.
So these trade-offs. This is why I love these discussions, because you as a consumer, Mike, are faced with these labels. And very often these labels come with a 20, 30, 60, 80% premium in price. And you say, I'm going to buy this non-GMO spaghetti. Well, there isn't any genetically modified spaghetti. It doesn't exist.
That is we shop frequently at an all organic market, and I've always, because Dan Sullivan was on this from the very beginning, probably because of you. You know, I remember him talking about how, you know, the quickest way to so I'm paraphrasing, but you know, the quickest way to starve a bunch of people is to go organic. You know, it's like,
I mean, and that's not to say that there's not a lot of technology inside of that practice that couldn't make sense and couldn't be adopted in larger scale by conventional farmers. Why couldn't? Again, I just keep saying that pragmatically, the future is GMO, genetically modified organic farming, because everybody would like to use less pesticides. Everybody would like to use less fertilizer. Everybody would like to increase soil organic matter, but to do so, we have to use science to do so. But that phraseology that I just shared with you is paradoxically opposed to each other, and they painted each other in corners.
And this is my last question for you, but I have a ton more, but this is the last one for today, because this got me started thinking about the whole grown local. How do you feel about the locally grown, I guess is what it's, you know, typically referred to as?
Well, again, it all depends. You think about this. I live in Canada. I'm staring out. We just had a snowstorm last week. So I'm staring out at, there's no leaves on the trees. There's no grass. And yet you go to a restaurant and they say, we only serve grass-fed beef. Shit, I haven't seen grass since last April. How old is this beef?
Okay.
Or where does the beef come from? So there's no way you can have locally grown grass-fed beef in Canada right now. Here in Olds, Alberta, you can't have locally grown grass-fed beef in April because there hasn't been any grass since last October. So therefore, the movement, you know, to that, the whole marketing of grass-fed beef to consumer means that you're not buying local. So now the other side of it, if we were going to buy local here in Alberta, if I was going to buy local, what would I be buying for vegetables? There are no vegetables here. I mean, the only thing that you can have would be in your cellar, which would be beets and carrots and potatoes that you can store in your cellar. That's it. You can't store lettuce. You can't store spinach. You can't store cucumbers. You can by pickling. But so from a pragmatic standpoint, again, a lot of the ideology comes around, you know, from people who live in like San Francisco. So grow whatever you want all year round, no problem. But where you have something called snow in winter and minus 40, you can't. So local is great. And I think that the closer we get to our food, the better. In fact, I encourage your listeners to try to grow gardens, because you'll quickly appreciate things like fungicides. Because, I mean, Mother Nature is hard to manage when you're growing food, because insects and diseases and weeds are ferocious competitors. And so we have to learn more. And I'm a big believer that we could support more local food production, but it will come with a cost. And again, for a lot of people, that disposable income is a finite number that they're going to spend on food. So that increase in support, that increase in ideology comes with a cost. And so not everybody can afford that. It's cheaper to bring our What did I just have the other day? Green beans yesterday. I had green beans and they came from Mexico. Well, to grow green beans in Alberta in the middle of wintertime is pretty damn tough.
Right.
Not to say it can happen, but it's tough.
I love your approach to this. I hope more people come to the table, and especially this GMOF, genetic modified organic farming. That would be, I don't know, it just makes a lot of sense. How do you get people? Yeah. And then we didn't even get into how you're going to use technology really, and maybe another time, but
yeah, we should do this again. I'd love to talk about greenhouse gases and carbon, and I'd love to talk about technology. I think I could fascinate your listeners with how we're integrating convergence on the farm of technology. So at some point, it'd be a delight to talk to you again.
All right, let's do it. Rob, thanks so much for being on the show today and sharing your wisdom and your experience and your pragmatic ideas, your good ideas. You got my mind working a ton, and I'm sure everybody listening.
I hope your listeners, and I hope they can go to my website, robertsaik.com. They can check me out check out the TEDx talk. They can order the books on Amazon, and Food 5.0 is a pretty fun read, so you'd enjoy that.
And just so you know, his last name is spelled Saik. So Robert, Saik.com.
Saik, yeah, robertsaik.com, yep.
Got it. All right, thanks so much.
All right. Thanks, buddy.
Brother. Thank you. See you, Mike.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the How Did Happen podcast, where we believe that success doesn't happen unless you make it happen. You can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you like to listen. And while you're there, please rate it and leave a comment as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts about the show, ideas for future guests, or whatever you'd like to share. And of course, you can always find me at MikeMalatesta.com. See you next time. Thanks again for listening to the How Did Happen podcast.